Comment where you're watching from today. This story might just change how you think about judging others. The morning sun cast long shadows across the used car lot as J.D. Vance walked between rows of vehicles, his work boots leaving imprints in the light dusting of early spring frost. The lot was quiet except for the distant sound of morning traffic and the crunch of gravel under his feet. He wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a reliable used truck that could handle both daily commutes and weekend work. At the far end of the lot, a slightly weathered Ford F-150 caught his eye. The blue paint had faded somewhat around the edges, but the body was solid, and a quick glance underneath showed no concerning rust. This was exactly the kind of practical vehicle he was looking for. As he ran his hand along the truck's side, taking in its sturdy construction, the sound of expensive leather shoes on gravel announced someone's approach. "Are you actually considering this truck?" The voice carried that particular tone of amused condescension that seemed to echo from every corner of the elite circles J.D. had encountered throughout his career. A man in an impeccably tailored suit stood there, designer sunglasses perched on his nose despite the early hour, a gleaming luxury car key fob dangling from his manicured fingers. J.D. turned slowly, taking in the man's appearance, Alexander Townsend, according to the name badge clipped to his belt. He was clearly a regular at this dealership's luxury division, probably there to pick up his latest high-end purchase. The kind of person who saw cars as status symbols rather than tools. "Yes, I am," J.D. replied evenly, his Appalachian accent slightly more pronounced than usual. He'd learned long ago not to hide where he came from, even if it sometimes drew reactions like this. Alexander's laugh was sharp and quick, like the closing of an expensive car door. "Well, that's interesting. You know, they have much better options over in the new vehicle section. Something more appropriate for someone who wants to make the right impression." He gestured toward the glossy showroom visible in the distance. J.D. noticed a small crowd of salespeople and customers beginning to gather within earshot, drawn by Alexander's deliberately projected voice. This was clearly meant to be a performance, a public lesson in social hierarchy. What Alexander didn't realize was that he was about to become part of a very different kind of lesson. The right impression? J.D.'s voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "And what impression would that be, Mr. Townsend?" "Well, you know." Alexander waved his hand dismissively. "In our circles, certain choices reflect on one's position, success, the ability to make good decisions." Each word was carefully chosen, dripping with implications about class and worth. A small smile played at the corners of J.D.'s mouth. "Our circles? And which circles would those be?" The growing audience shifted uncomfortably. Something in J.D.'s tone suggested the conversation wasn't going quite the way Alexander had planned. The circles of successful people, of course. Those who understand the importance of presentation. Alexander's confidence was starting to show tiny cracks around the edges, like paint beginning to peel. People who know better than to waste time on used vehicles. "I see." J.D. nodded thoughtfully. "And I suppose success to you means having the most expensive things? The shiniest toys? The ability to look down on others for making practical choices?" Alexander's smirk faltered slightly. Something about J.D.'s composed demeanor was making him increasingly uncertain. "Listen, I'm just trying to help you avoid a mistake. Someone in your position clearly needs guidance on these matters." The condescension in his voice was becoming forced, defensive. "My position?" J.D.'s smile widened slightly. "Would that be my position as a venture capitalist? As a best-selling author? As a United States senator? Or perhaps you're referring to my position as someone who understands that true success isn't measured by the price tag on your vehicle." The color drained from Alexander's face as realization dawned. The gathering crowd shifted again, this time with barely suppressed amusement. One of the salespeople stepped forward, suddenly very eager to assist. "Senator Vance, I apologize for any inconvenience. We would be more than happy to show you whatever vehicles you're interested in." The salesperson's tone was professional but carried an unmistakable note of satisfaction at Alexander's discomfort. "Thank you, but I'm quite interested in this truck. You see, Mr. Townsend," J.D. turned back to the now speechless man, I grew up in a working-class family in Ohio. I learned early on that value isn't about showing off, it's about making smart choices. This truck is practical, reliable, and exactly what I need. The fact that it's used? That just means I'm making a financially sound decision, something any truly successful person would understand. Alexander opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally managed to stammer. I had no idea. I didn't mean to. Of course you didn't. JD's voice was gentle now, but firm. You made assumptions based on appearances and your own preconceptions about success. But here's something I've learned through my journey from a working-class background to the Senate. True success isn't about what you own, it's about who you are and how you treat others. The gathered crowd was completely silent now, absorbing the lesson playing out before them. Even the morning traffic seemed to have quieted. The funny thing is, JD continued, turning back to inspect the truck, if you'd approached this conversation differently, if you'd been curious instead of condescending, respectful instead of dismissive, you might have made a valuable connection today. Instead, you've demonstrated exactly why many people feel disconnected from those they consider elite. Alexander shifted uncomfortably, his expensive shoes scuffing against the gravel. The carefully constructed facade of superiority had crumbled, leaving him looking surprisingly small in his designer suit. I apologize, Senator, he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. You're right, I was completely out of line. JD nodded, accepting the apology with grace. The important thing isn't that you made a mistake. We all do that. The important thing is learning from it. He turned to the salesperson. Now, shall we discuss the details for this truck? As the salesperson eagerly led JD toward the office, the crowd began to disperse, but not before shooting glances at Alexander, who stood rooted to the spot, his lessons about success and status turned upside down in the space of a few minutes. The morning sun had risen higher now, erasing the shadows from the lot. In its clear light, a used truck had become the centerpiece of a lesson about judgment, success, and the true measure of a person's worth. And somewhere in the background, you could almost hear the quiet voice of wisdom whispering that the most valuable things in life aren't always the ones with the highest price tags. As the story of that morning spread throughout the community, it became more than just an amusing anecdote about a humbled snob. It became a reminder that success comes in many forms, that judgment often says more about the judge than the judged, and that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places, even a used car lot on a frosty morning. What would you have done in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from today. The story of what happened in that car lot spread rapidly through the community, rippling outward like waves in a pond. By afternoon, the dealership had become an unlikely stage for a series of conversations that would transform more than just Alexander Townsend's perspective. Inside the dealership's break room, Mark Gallagher, a veteran salesperson with 20 years of experience, gathered his younger colleagues around. The morning's events had sparked something he hadn't seen in years, a genuine discussion about values, assumptions, and the true nature of success. You should have seen Alexander's face. Heather Butler, one of the newer sales associates, recounted to those who had missed the morning's encounter. It was like watching someone's entire worldview crack in real time. Mark nodded thoughtfully, his coffee cup warming his weathered hands. You know, in all my years here, I've never seen a lesson in humility delivered with such grace. Senator Vance could have humiliated him, could have thrown his power and position around. Instead, he turned it into a teaching moment. The break room fell silent as everyone absorbed this observation. Through the large windows, they could see the spot where the encounter had taken place, now occupied by nothing more than empty space and morning shadows. But the impact of what had happened there continued to reverberate. What impressed me most, added Sarah Douglas, the finance manager, was how Senator Vance didn't just shut Alexander down, he explained why his approach was wrong. He made it about understanding, not shame. As the day progressed, the story began to take on different dimensions. Customers who came in throughout the day, having heard snippets through social media or local gossip, asked for details. Each retelling seemed to reveal new layers of meaning. Around midday, an unexpected visitor arrived at the dealership. Rachel Kirk, a local high school teacher, had heard about the incident from one of her students whose parent worked at the dealership. She came in specifically to talk to Mark about using the story in her economics class. "It's a perfect real-world example of several concepts we've been discussing," Rachel explained, her eyes bright with educational possibility. "The difference between value and price, the role of status symbols in society, the economic wisdom of buying used vehicles. It's all there in one powerful story." Mark found himself sharing details he hadn't even realized he'd noticed: the way J.D. Vance had maintained his composure, how he'd used his own background to bridge understanding rather than create distance, the careful way he'd dismantled prejudices without destroying the person holding them. Meanwhile, in his office across town, Alexander Townsend sat at his desk, staring out the window at his own luxury car in the parking lot. For the first time, he found himself questioning not just his earlier behavior, but the entire framework of assumptions that had led to it. He pulled out his phone and began researching J.D. Vance's background: the challenging childhood in Ohio, the Marine Corps service, Yale Law School, the successful career, and eventually his rise to the Senate. The more he read, the more he understood the depth of his own ignorance that morning. His secretary, Amanda Morris, noticed the change in him when she brought in his afternoon coffee. Usually absorbed in calls or emails, today he was quiet, contemplative. When she asked if everything was all right, he surprised her with his candor. "I made a fool of myself today, Amanda," he admitted, something she'd never heard from him before. "Worse than that, I embodied everything that's wrong with how we judge success in our society." Amanda, who drove a 15-year-old Honda herself, felt a sudden connection with her usually distant boss. "We all make mistakes," she offered. "It's what we do afterward that matters." Back at the dealership, the afternoon sun cast different shadows across the lot as Daniel Harrison, another customer, examined the same truck that had been at the center of the morning's events. He'd come in looking for something new and flashy, but the story he'd heard had made him reconsider his priorities. "You know," he said to Mark, who was showing him the vehicle, "I came in today thinking I needed to impress people with what I drive. Now I'm wondering who exactly I'm trying to impress and why." Mark smiled, remembering J.D. Vance's words about practical choices and true success. Sometimes the best impression we can make is showing that we're secure enough to make sensible decisions. As the day wore on, the story continued to evolve. Someone had posted a brief video clip of the encounter on social media, and it was gaining traction. Comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences with judgment based on appearances, with making assumptions, with learning hard lessons about true value. In the early evening, Alexander Townsend returned to the dealership. He looked different now, humbled, but also somehow more human. He found Mark in the showroom and asked to speak with him privately. "I've been thinking all day about what happened," Alexander began, his usual polish replaced by genuine reflection. "About how many other times I might have made similar judgments without being called out on them. About how many opportunities one might have missed because I was too busy looking down on people instead of looking at them." Mark listened as Alexander continued, "I want to make this right. Not just with Senator Vance, but with everyone here. I'm thinking about starting a mentorship program at my firm, specifically focused on helping people from working-class backgrounds enter the financial sector. Maybe it's time to start breaking down some of these barriers instead of reinforcing them." The transformation Mark saw in Alexander was perhaps the most powerful part of the day's impact. It wasn't just about one person learning a lesson, it was about how that lesson could ripple outward, creating real change. As closing time approached, Mark received an unexpected email. It was from J.D. Vance, thanking the dealership staff for their professionalism and sharing some thoughts about the morning's events. One line stood out: "Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our most uncomfortable moments. What matters isn't the initial judgment, but our willingness to learn and grow from our mistakes." The dealership staff gathered for their end-of-day meeting, but instead of the usual sales numbers and targets, the discussion centered on what they'd all witnessed and learned. Even those who hadn't been present for the morning's encounter had been affected by its aftermath. "You know what's really interesting?" Jessica Cooper, the marketing manager, observed. "We sell cars for a living, but today wasn't really about cars at all. It was about how we see each other, how we measure success, how we choose to treat people before we know their story. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and orange as the staff began to leave for the day. The used truck that had started it all sat quietly in its spot, no longer just a vehicle, but a symbol of something larger, a reminder that true value isn't always visible at first glance, and that real success might look very different from what we expect. In the days that followed, the story would continue to spread, touching lives in unexpected ways. A local business owner would decide to revise his hiring practices, looking beyond surface appearances to find hidden talent. A high school student would choose a practical used car over the flashy new one they'd been saving for, proud of making a wise financial decision. A corporate executive would start a conversation about class assumptions in their workplace. But perhaps the most lasting impact was the quiet revolution it sparked in individual hearts and minds, the moment of pause before making assumptions, the recognition that success comes in many forms, the understanding that every person we meet has a story we don't yet know. As Mark locked up the dealership that evening, he glanced one last time at the spot where it had all happened. In the growing darkness, he could almost see the ghosts of the morning's encounter, the proud senator, the humbled executive, the gathered crowd. Each person who had witnessed or heard about the event had taken away their own lesson, their own piece of wisdom to carry forward. The story of the man who laughed at J.D. Vance for buying a used truck had become more than just an amusing anecdote. It had become a mirror, reflecting back our own assumptions and prejudices, challenging us to question our measures of success, reminding us that true worth often lies beneath the surface. And somewhere in the quiet of that evening, as the last light faded from the sky, the lesson continued to spread, touching lives and changing perspectives, one story at a time. Has someone ever judged you wrongly based on appearances? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. A week after the incident at the dealership, its impact continued to resonate through the community in unexpected ways. The viral video of the encounter had sparked a national conversation about class, success, and judgment, but it was in the local community where the most profound changes were taking place. Emily Harris, a local journalist for the city newspaper, sat in her favorite coffee shop, reviewing her notes for an upcoming feature story about the incident. What had started as a simple human interest piece had evolved into something far more significant. Her laptop screen displayed dozens of interviews, each revealing a new layer to the story's impact. It wasn't just about a senator and a luxury car buyer, said Thomas Lawrence, a regular customer at the dealership, in one of her recorded interviews. It was about all of us, how we judge, how we're judged, and what we consider valuable in life. The coffee shop itself had become an unofficial hub for discussions about the incident. At a nearby table, a group of business students from the local university were engaged in an animated debate about the economics of used vehicles versus new ones, their textbooks pushed aside in favor of real-world analysis. But that's exactly what makes Senator Vance's choice so significant, Emily overheard one student, Michael Smith, arguing. He could easily afford any vehicle he wanted, but he chose based on practical value rather than status. It's a perfect example of what we've been studying about rational economic decision-making. As Emily sipped her coffee, she noticed Alexander Townsend enter the shop. The man had become something of a local legend, though not in the way he might have once hoped. But what caught her attention wasn't his designer clothes or his chastened demeanor, it was the young man walking beside him. Jordan Bass, a mechanic's apprentice from the dealership service department, was deep in conversation with Alexander. The unlikely pair found a table near Emily, giving her the perfect opportunity to observe this unexpected development. The mentorship program is really coming together, she heard Alexander say, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of genuine conviction rather than social performance. Your perspective on how we can make it more accessible to people from working-class backgrounds is exactly what we need. Jordan nodded, pulling out a notebook filled with detailed observations. The key is understanding that talent and potential don't always come wrapped in traditional packages. Sometimes the best candidates are the ones who've had to work twice as hard to get half as far. Emily found herself reaching for her own notebook, recognizing that she was witnessing another chapter of this evolving story. The man who had once dismissed someone for buying a used truck was now actively working to break down the very barriers he had helped maintain. Across town at the local high school, Rachel Kirk's economics class had turned into something unexpected. The incident had inspired her to develop an entire unit about value, perception, and economic decision-making. Today's discussion was particularly lively. "But Miss Kirk," said Chelsea Johnson, one of her students, "isn't it weird that we judge people based on their cars in the first place? I mean, my dad drives an old pickup truck, but he's one of the smartest people I know when it comes to managing money." Rachel smiled, glad to see her students engaging with the deeper implications. That's exactly the kind of critical thinking we need to develop. Why do we associate certain purchases with success? Who benefits from these assumptions? The classroom whiteboard was filled with notes from their discussion: value versus status, hidden costs of luxury, social capital versus financial wisdom. These weren't just academic concepts anymore. They had become real-world lessons that the students could see playing out in their own community. Back at the dealership, Mark Gallagher was showing a customer around when he noticed something interesting. People weren't just asking about prices and features anymore. They were asking about value, longevity, practical considerations. The conversation had shifted from impressing others to making smart choices. "You know what's really changed?" he later told Emily during her interview. "People are proud of making practical decisions now. It's like Senator Vance gave everyone permission to prioritize value over vanity." The ripple effects continued to spread. Local businesses began reconsidering their hiring practices, looking beyond surface appearances to find hidden talent. The Chamber of Commerce organized a series of workshops about economic literacy and practical financial decision-making. Even the local luxury car dealerships started promoting the long-term value of their vehicles rather than just their status appeal. But perhaps the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. Christina Lawrence, a social media influencer known for promoting luxury lifestyle content, had witnessed the incident firsthand and was profoundly affected by it. Her latest video series, True Value: Redefining Success, had gone viral for entirely different reasons than her usual content. "I've spent years telling people that success looks like expensive cars and designer clothes," she admitted in one particularly powerful video. "But watching Senator Vance that day, seeing how he carried himself, understanding his reasons for choosing that truck, it made me question everything I've been promoting." Emily included Christina's transformation in her article, recognizing it as a powerful example of how the incident had challenged people to reconsider their own roles in perpetuating harmful assumptions. The story had even reached the state capitol, where discussions about economic policy had taken on a new dimension. Politicians from both parties were suddenly talking about practical value and fiscal responsibility in more personal, relatable terms. "It's not just about policies anymore," State Representative Sarah Kelly told Emily. "It's about understanding the real experiences of our constituents, about recognizing that success doesn't always wear a designer label." As evening approached, Emily found herself back at the dealership, watching the sunset paint the rows of vehicles in shades of gold. The used truck that had started it all had long since been sold, but its impact lingered. She watched as a young couple, James and Angela Thompson, examined a used SUV. Their conversation wasn't about status or appearance. It was about reliability, fuel efficiency, and their family's needs. The salesperson, Heather Butler, wasn't pushing them toward a more expensive model but was genuinely helping them find the best value for their situation. "You know what's really beautiful about all this?" Heather later told Emily. "We're having honest conversations now. People aren't trying to buy vehicles they can't afford just to impress others. They're making choices that actually make sense for their lives." The story had evolved far beyond a simple encounter between a senator and a judgmental executive. It had become a catalyst for change, a mirror reflecting our societal values, and a reminder that true success often looks very different from what we've been conditioned to expect. As Emily finished her article late that night, she realized that the story's power lay not in the initial conflict, but in how it had prompted people to examine their own assumptions and choices. The incident had created a space for honest conversations about class, value, and the real meaning of success. Her final paragraph captured the essence of what she had observed. In a world often driven by appearances and status symbols, a simple choice to buy a used truck became an unexpected catalyst for change. The ripples from that morning continue to spread, challenging our assumptions about success, value, and worth. Perhaps the true measure of impact isn't in the initial splash, but in the waves of change that follow. In the conversations started, the perspectives shifted, and the lives touched by a moment of truth in a car dealership on a sunny morning. As she submitted her article, Emily couldn't help but wonder how many more lives would be touched by this story, how many more people would pause before making judgments, how many more conversations would start about what really matters in life. The sun had long since set, but the lights of the dealership still illuminated the lot where it all began. In the quiet of the evening, it was easy to imagine that somewhere, someone else was learning these same valuable lessons about judgment, success, and the true meaning of value. Have you ever had an experience that changed how you view success? Share your story in the comments below. 1 month after the incident that had transformed a simple car purchase into a catalyst for change, the community gathered for an unexpected event. The local community college had organized a symposium titled Redefining Success: Lessons from an Unexpected Moment. The auditorium was packed with people from all walks of life, each drawn by how a single interaction had challenged their perspectives on value, worth, and judgment. David Miller, the college's economics professor, stood at the podium, surveying the diverse crowd. When we first proposed this symposium, some people questioned whether a brief encounter at a car dealership warranted such attention, he began. But as we've seen over the past month, sometimes the most profound lessons come from the simplest moments. In the front row, Mark Gallagher from the dealership sat beside Alexander Townsend. The unlikely friendship that had developed between them was perhaps the most tangible example of how the incident had broken down social barriers. Alexander's mentorship program had already accepted its first cohort of students from working-class backgrounds, with Mark serving as one of the advisory board members. What we witnessed that day, Alexander shared when it was his turn to speak, wasn't just about a senator choosing a used truck. It was about the masks we wear, the judgments we make, and the opportunities we miss when we let prejudice blind us to true value. The audience listened intently as Alexander described his transformation. Gone was the polished arrogance that had characterized him during the incident. In its place was something more authentic, a genuine desire to learn from and connect with others across social boundaries. Sarah Douglas, the dealership's finance manager, presented data showing a remarkable shift in customer behavior over the past month. We're seeing a significant increase in buyers focusing on practical value rather than status, she explained. People are asking better questions, making more informed decisions, and most importantly, feeling proud of their choices regardless of price point. The symposium had drawn attention from beyond the local community. National media outlets had sent representatives, recognizing that the story reflected broader societal issues about class, value, and perception. Among them was Catherine Wagner, a respected economic journalist, who saw parallels between this local phenomenon and national trends. What's happening here is a microcosm of a larger shift in American society, Catherine observed during the panel discussion. We're seeing a reevaluation of what success looks like, particularly in the aftermath of recent economic challenges. This incident simply provided a focal point for conversations that were already brewing. During the lunch break, small groups formed throughout the venue, each sharing their own experiences and revelations. Emily Harris, whose newspaper article had helped spread the story, observed these interactions with satisfaction. Her latest follow-up piece would focus on how the incident had created lasting changes in the community. One particularly moving moment came when Jordan Bass, the mechanic's apprentice now involved in Alexander's mentorship program, shared his perspective. "All my life, I've been judged by what I couldn't afford," he said. But this incident showed that true respect isn't about what you own, it's about who you are and the wisdom of your choices. The afternoon sessions focused on practical applications of the lessons learned. Rachel Kirk, the high school teacher who had incorporated the incident into her economics curriculum, led a workshop on teaching financial literacy and value-based decision-making to young people. "We're not just teaching them about money," Rachel explained. We're teaching them about worth, both material and personal. When Senator Vance chose that used truck, he demonstrated that success isn't about impressing others, it's about making choices aligned with your values. As the day progressed, more stories emerged of how the incident had inspired change. Christina Lawrence, the former luxury lifestyle influencer, described how her content had evolved to focus on practical value and authentic success. Her new approach had actually increased her following, suggesting a genuine hunger for more substantive conversations about worth and status. "My followers used to come for the glamour," Christina said. "Now they come for the honesty. We talk about making smart choices, about finding value in unexpected places, about defining success on our own terms." The symposium also addressed the role of social media in spreading the story and its lessons. Dr. James Cohen, a media studies professor, analyzed how the viral video of the incident had sparked different conversations than typical viral content. Usually, viral videos about confrontations focus on conflict and humiliation, Dr. Cohen noted. But this one was different because of how Senator Vance handled the situation. He chose education over embarrassment, understanding over vindication. That's what made it resonate so deeply. As the afternoon sessions continued, Amanda Morris, Alexander's secretary, shared how the workplace environment at their firm had changed. "It's not just about the mentorship program," she explained. "There's a fundamental shift in how we interact with each other. Status matters less than character now." The transformation of the dealership itself was another focal point of discussion. Mark described how their sales approach had evolved, focusing on helping customers make wise decisions rather than pushing for the most expensive options. Customer satisfaction had actually increased, and their reputation in the community had never been stronger. "We're not just selling cars anymore," Mark said. "We're participating in a larger conversation about value, judgment, and success. Every transaction is an opportunity to reinforce these lessons." One particularly impactful moment came when a video message from Senator Vance was played for the attendees. He hadn't been able to attend in person, but his words captured the broader significance of what had transpired. "What happened that morning wasn't about me or about the truck," he said. "It was about the assumptions we carry and the opportunities we have to challenge them. Every day we have choices, not just about what we buy, but about how we treat others, how we measure success, and how we define value." The symposium concluded with a community dialogue, where attendees shared their own stories of transformation. Parents talked about teaching their children new lessons about worth and success. Business owners described changing their hiring practices to look beyond surface appearances. Students shared how the incident had influenced their career and educational choices. As the event drew to a close, Professor Miller returned to the podium with some final observations. "When future historians look back at this period in our community's life, they might be surprised that so much change came from such a simple moment. But that's often how progress works, not through grand gestures, but through small moments that challenge us to be better." The evening ended with a community dinner in the college cafeteria, where people from all walks of life sat together, continuing the conversations that had begun during the day. The artificial barriers of class and status that had once seemed so important now felt strangely irrelevant. Alexander and Mark shared a table with Jordan and several other participants, their discussion ranging from practical business advice to personal stories of overcoming judgment. The genuine warmth and connection between them stood as testament to how much had changed in just 1 month. As people began to leave, Emily Harris captured one final quote for her article, this time from Sarah Douglas. "You know what's really beautiful about all this? It's not just that we learn to judge less, it's that we learn to value more. We learned to see worth in places we might have overlooked before." The parking lot outside the college told its own story. Luxury vehicles and used trucks sat side by side, their owners no longer concerned about what their choice of transportation might signal to others. Each vehicle represented a personal choice, made with wisdom and confidence rather than social pressure. As the last attendees departed, the evening light cast long shadows across the campus. But unlike the shadows of judgment that had once divided the community, these shadows seemed to connect rather than separate, A reminder that when we look past surface appearances, we often find unexpected value and common ground. The story of the man who laughed at J.D. Vance for buying a used truck had become more than just a viral moment or a local legend. It had become a catalyst for lasting change, a reminder that true transformation often begins with a simple choice to see things and people differently. What assumptions have you challenged lately? How has your definition of success evolved? Share your thoughts in the comments below.